Shabbat Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Vayikra, the very first Torah portion in Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. This Torah portion describes 5 different kinds of offerings that were to be made by the children of Israel in the tabernacle and then later in the temple. And this is really the beginning of what we know in English as the sacrificial cult and the instructions for how all that should be carried out. It's interesting to note that the word sacrifice is a word that actually comes from Latin and Old French, sacer, meaning from the same word as sacred, to make something holy, and feis from facer or hacer, if you know in modern Spanish, which is to make. So by making a sacrifice, you make something holy. And the original terminology was sort of meant, or at least felt, as a way to appease the gods by giving something of ourselves, by making something holy, by sacrificing it, that we could appease the gods. This is not really the sense in Judaism. In Judaism, even the prophets, say, does God have any? Does God need to have a sacrifice? Does God smell it? Does it please God? Right? That's not really the case. In Hebrew, a sacrifice is called a korban, which comes from the word karov or lekarev, which means to bring close. And so this was a way for us to bring ourselves closer to God, to try to find a way to connect with God in some way so that we could sort of have some of that holiness rub off on us and be better human beings in the process. It is a very different viewpoint than what we see in other religious traditions, this idea of coming close and not necessarily making something holy. Of course, when we talk about sacrifice today, we talk about giving something up, right? I had to sacrifice my golf game because I had to go visit my mother-in-law, right? Something like that. We make a sacrifice, and it almost has a negative connotation to it. And so one of the things I'd like us to think about is in our own lives when we make those kinds of sacrifices, what is our motivation? And hopefully we can take a look at it and say to ourselves, the motivation should be a way of bringing ourselves closer, either sacrificing something for another person to bring ourselves closer to that person, or sacrificing something to bring ourselves closer to an ideal, a value, or a goal that we hold dear. So that's this week's Torah portion. Of course, next week will be the last Shabbat before Pesach, Shabbat Hagadol. This week at Beth El, the Heights Synagogue, we mark the yurtzites of the following individuals: Isidore Einhorn, Ben Engel, Ida Glanz, Gregory Reamer, Saul Lewis Myers, Iris Bergsman, Israel David Margolin, Leonora Katz, Elise Sloan Felber, Hyman Fromson, and Barbara Joyce Gilden. Wishing everybody Shabbat Shalom.